Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to welcome today Ambassador Lana Nusseibeh, the permanent representative of the United Arab Emirates to the United Nations. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining me. You know, the most burning question and issue right now is the US presidential election. And Joe Biden is holding a lead, but a winner hasn't been announced yet. The world is watching. I know the UAE is watching. How does the UAE view a Biden administration, and how confident are you about the US maintaining the regional priorities in the Gulf and Middle East?
Well, first of all, Michal, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm particularly excited that you've just come back from the United Arab Emirates and have visited my country recently. And I think that the cooperation that has come out of these Abraham Accords that were recently signed with the help of the US administration is really just a beacon for a different kind of future for our region, and one that we're all going to be building on. Of course, this is the US is undergoing its electoral process. I will not comment on that election process until it is completed and the American people have chosen their future government. But the UAE has, like it has with several administrations in the past, worked with whichever administration, whichever US administration the American people choose. And I have no doubt that whether it's a President Trump two administration or a Joe Biden administration, that our relationship will remain the strong and strategic partnership that it always has been. Over the decades, the UAE has been a primary partner for the United States in the region and has been a core strategic partner. We have been on the battlefield together, countering extremism and terrorism in various theaters. We're the #1 export market for the United States in the region. We share values, we share people-to-people exchanges, we share culture, and the educational exchanges, etc. And I think that it's those institutional links that are the bedrock of the relationship. So I think that the relationship will continue to grow in the coming period. The UAE firmly believes in the importance of the US role in the Middle East, its stabilizing role in the Middle East region. And I think we will continue to have those conversations around the future stability and strategic dialogue that our region so desperately needs. So a strong partnership with the United States and with its people is definitely on the top of the foreign policy priorities of the United Arab Emirates.
So maybe you actually can offer some comfort, because I know a lot of Israelis and Emiratis are watching very tensely. So are you at all concerned that a new administration could jeopardize the Abraham Accords?
No, we're not concerned. I think it's very clear that there is on both sides of the aisle very strong support for this agreement that the UAE signed with Israel, with the US administration being a part of that agreement. I think Vice President Biden has made that clear in successive statements. I think he's stated actually that he would seek to build on the agreement if he was elected to office. I think Israel is such a part and parcel of the US foreign policy outlook, and it's an issue that divides both parties, that unites both parties. And so I think it's very clear that this is going to have bipartisan support as we go forward, and it's clear that they will build on this and on successive agreements like the one signed with Bahrain and with Sudan to create a new dynamic for peace in the region.
You know, with the Abraham Accords, which we'll soon be able to talk about more thoroughly once the election is over, things are moving very fast. So my question to you is, when do you think we can expect an embassy? And will a UAE embassy be in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem?
So the relationship is moving very quickly. I think there are a number of agreements that are being negotiated and signed as we speak. The most recent was a high-level visit of UAE officials to Israel to sign a visa exemption agreement. Agreements have been signed in the areas of civil aviation, cooperation, protection of investments, etc. And these are all underway. We're going to have 28 flights between Israel and the UAE, an additional 10 cargo flights. I think you're going to see an immense amount of enthusiasm for tourism and travel and educational exchange. Hebrew is already being taught in the Emirates Diplomatic Academy as one of the languages for diplomats to learn. So the pace of the relationship is going to move quickly. Embassies are definitely going to be a part of that. And let's not forget that the Israeli government have had a mission in Abu Dhabi since 2013 at the International Renewable Energy Agency. And so over the past decade or so, I think Israel has been coming to the UAE, has been participating in our international conferences and venues. They've had a mission at IRENA. And this is a culmination of that past decade of cooperation around the issues that we all find challenging and that we have shared concerns around in the region, whether it's climate change and renewable energy, most recently around COVID-19, and a cooperation agreement has been signed there. Cooperation around the field of energy has been discussed and signed. And so I think these are going to be the areas where you see very quick movement. Exact dates of embassy, I think it's being discussed. And I think, of course, the embassy will be in Tel Aviv in line with international parameters. So that's the plan at the moment. When and exactly, I think is in process.
All right, and thank you for recognizing the Israeli mission in Abu Dhabi. It's definitely laid the foundation for a lot of what's happening now. I know the UAE has received a fair share of criticism over the Abraham Accords. As a country, I know individuals have received a lot of backlash, a lot within the Arab world. How has it affected your regional alliances, and is this something you can also feel within the UN?
At the end of the day, it's the sovereign decision of a country, it's the sovereign right of a country to choose to establish or normalize relationships with another country. That's the basis of the UN Charter. That's the basis of how the international system works. So I think we're very comfortable with the decision that we took, and the UAE has not survived and thrived in terms of its model for the region without taking some risks. And I think we've recognized that in the region that we are in, with the kind of nihilistic agendas, the extremist agendas that want to attract our youth to a much more dangerous worldview, that we really need to go out there and sell our model of tolerance, our model of coexistence, our model of living together side by side in peace. And I think that's what we've done with this first step, which is the normalization agreement. It's not a popularity contest. You have to take risks in the region. To do the right thing for your country and for your people. If you look at the surveys of Emirati youth and the general population, you'll see this was actually a very popular move for our society. Everyone's very excited about the normalization agreement. They're excited about the opportunities. They don't have the historic baggage that other countries in the region have of having had a conflict with Israel, etc. And I think that they see that in all these areas where there's so much opportunity for cooperation and cultural exchange and shared views, that the time is now to start moving in that direction. So I think we're confident of our decision and we want to build on it. As you will have seen yourself when you visited, their intention is for this to be a very warm relationship. If we can show that this is a successful case study in how to do business in the region, that we can widen the tent, bring more people in, then hopefully we can create that new dynamic that we're seeking to ultimately create the dynamics for a Middle East-wide peace that includes a resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the two-state solution along the international parameters that we also subscribe to. And we follow in the path of other countries that have had long-standing agreements with Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. And so I think that this is not something new for the region, but at a moment where everything seems difficult and entrenched and complex, I hope we've opened up a window, an avenue for opportunity to think about the region in a different way and to sell the peace dividend to all of the peoples in the region, and particularly the youth of our region, 60% of the region under the age of 30, who are looking for a life of opportunity, economic opportunity, peace, stability, a place to bring up their families, educate them, and live a successful and meaningful life. And I think that's on the governments of the region to offer to their people. And that's the societal, social contract that we're now looking at in terms of where governance goes in the region.
So you mentioned the Palestinians, and I'd like to follow up on that. We know that blocking annexation allowed for the Abraham Accords to really materialize. What are the next steps, and what will the UAE's role be in advancing any negotiations between the Palestinians and Israel?
So we've always said from the outside, that this is an issue that concerns the Palestinians and the Israelis primarily, that they are the two sides that need to sit down and decide the parameters of their peace, and that the Arab countries will support that consensus as it is decided by the Palestinians. If we maintain that position, we are, and we have consistently been part of the Arab consensus around the two-state solution, and we will continue to be part of that Arab consensus. But we've never been a front row player in that issue. It's been primarily the Egyptians and the Jordanians, and of course the Palestinians themselves. So we will continue to be supportive within our group and internationally. We hope that this channel of communication with Israel can be helpful to a peace process. We think that a peace process that is real and grounded in results will ultimately benefit us and benefit the whole region and benefit the youth of the region as well. So it is in our interests, as well as in the interests of both the Palestinians and the Israelis, to help encourage that environment. And of course, the issue of annexation was something that we were hearing in European capitals and around the world was going to be the death knell of the two-state solution. And so I think by incorporating it in our normalization agreement, we've hopefully created that window, that dynamic for change, and it's up to the sides to step through and take that opportunity. And I think that's why you saw the Secretary General of the United Nations welcome the agreement and immediately ask that efforts be made to revive the negotiations between the two sides. And we look forward to seeing that materialize.
All right, so let's talk more about the UN. Many will say it's notorious for its anti-Israel resolutions. Will the UAE vote differently now moving forward, now that Israel and the UAE are closer alliances? And just if you can give us a sense of the UN itself and the different relations that you have now, both with the Israeli ambassador and Arab representatives, and how has that shifted, or how has that been influenced, if at all?
The UN is a complicated place. It's an important place. If you look back to its founding in 1945 after the Second World War, to prevent further war, to create peace and stability around the world. And the Security Council really is this key chamber for peace and security. And I think its importance shouldn't be underestimated. So if the UN didn't exist, we'd all think about how to create something like it. And with polarization in the world today, I think it would be very difficult to come up with a unique place like that again. So I do think we are all committed in our own way to this multilateral institution, and we all need to double down and help it move into this coming period to be more fit for purpose. And at the same time, what is extraordinary about the UN, I mean, I've been there 7 years now, and what I always find fascinating is one of the most fulfilling parts of the job is that all 193 members have a mission there. They have a delegate or a delegation there, and you can learn about every country around the world and its views and its policies and what matters to them, and what they see in terms of their national security as a priority, whether it's climate change for the Pacific Island states to whether it's actual military conflict with other countries being involved in other parts of the world. And so you really do see the full gamut of the global political stage in this great room, or the different conference rooms as people sit and debate. And I think that that's also been its strength in terms of how the UAE sees itself in the region, as a bridge builder, as a country that is focused on interfaith coexistence, on tolerance, on acceptance of the other. The UN very much syncs with that worldview that we have. I would say specifically to your question, at the same time, the UN is very much a place of regional groups. That's how we coordinate positions. And it's also a reflection of what is happening in capitals. So, the missions, the delegations take their instructions from capitals and they negotiate their positions accordingly. I think you'll see the UAE behaving in much the same way as Egypt and Jordan have. We are an influential player in our Arab group. And we move though on issues depending on how we see them as affecting our development agenda, our economic agenda, and the agenda that we're trying to promote for the region and internationally. So, for example, on gender empowerment and that issue, sometimes we find ourselves aligned in different configurations of groups. On climate change, we sometimes find ourselves aligned on different configurations, and so it really depends on the issue. What we try and do, and it's difficult for small and medium states to always do this, but we try and remain consistent to our foreign policy principles and priorities, because I think when you're always acting according to what you believe to be right, you can hold your head up in the United Nations and defend your position. It's difficult when sometimes you find yourself on the other side of that. And so I would say that on this, obviously I have now had a meeting with Ambassador Gilad Erdan. That wouldn't have been possible prior to normalization. We had an official meeting at the UAE mission, and actually we discussed every area of shared interest with the UN that is important to both of our two missions, and we found a lot of convergence. So it was gender equality was the first issue we talked about, the women, peace and security agenda, which is the idea that peace is only lasting and stable and secure if women are part of that negotiation process. So pushing that agenda forward is very important to us, especially as we enter the UN Security Council in 2022, 2023. Climate change and renewable energy and how to safeguard the gains made in the Paris Climate Accords was another topic. The future of digital cooperation and AI, and whether that space needs regulation to avoid it being harnessed by extremists for bad purposes, for criminal purposes, was another area of discussion. And so I think what we found where there were a lot of areas at the UN and in the multilateral sphere where down the line cooperation really was in both of our interests, because we had similar views on these issues. And I think that's why you've seen at the bilateral level so many agreements around things like COVID-19, the medical health space, agriculture, food security, water security. What are we going to do about these shared challenges in our region? On the political side, I think you will see, though, that the UAE remains within the Arab consensus on these issues and will continue to remain within that Arab consensus. But I think a lot of this happens at the bilateral level first, and we are at a stage of two countries, along with Bahrain, of course, and others, getting to know each other, building confidence, understanding each other's priorities, and that happens on the bilateral plane, and then I think it then moves to the multilateral. But I think the work has to be done on the bilateral plane. And I would like to stress here that I think we're very clear-eyed that the signing of an agreement is the first step, but a lot of work always remains to be done by both sides at the people-to-people level, etc., to really build the relationship in order for it to achieve what was intended. And I think that's where the hard work has to come in. You've mentioned there are detractors, that shouldn't stop us, but I think the hard work needs to come in to have a longer-term strategic view, as I said, of what this peace dividend can offer the region, can offer the youth in our region, the message of hope, the message of opportunity it sends. And we all need to work to make that a reality. And I think that's what we're starting to do at the UN and elsewhere.
So skeptics have called the peace agreement everything from a business deal, a military boost, mainly against Iran. What do you say to these critics? And also, how much did Iran's role in the region contribute to making this peace agreement happen?
So this agreement stands on its own merits. It doesn't have to be about any other country, and it isn't about any other country apart from the UAE and Israel. And I think it's clear from how quickly we've moved from the normalization stage and the signing to the plethora of agreements that we are now working on, that there is a energy and an enthusiasm on both sides to move in this direction quickly. And I think it's the people to people side that for me is the best response to the cynicism on a business deal, because actually it's youth wanting to study Hebrew, it's people wanting to travel and visit the religious and cultural sites, both directions. I think it's the idea that You can have shared technology, shared approaches to something as amazing as the medical innovation space to tackle COVID-19, which won't just help us and won't just help Israelis, it will help everyone around the region that's facing this universal pandemic. I think all of that, from where I sit at the UN, from the reactions I've heard from colleagues, from the reactions I've heard back home and the reactions you shared with me, and what you've seen on social media, all of that speaks to a moment of opportunity and hope, and not a moment of cynicism. Of course, we're respectful of other people's views, and everyone has a right to have a perspective of this that they choose to. But I think from our perspective, that's the perspective ultimately that matters, given that these are the two countries that have signed this agreement and that are working on this relationship together. From our perspective, this is a message of hope, a message of opportunity, and there are so many areas where we can hopefully work together to enrich the opportunities and the benefits. And as I said, the peace dividend can be sold to the region. And I think that's the starting point for us. And I know it's the starting point for the Israelis as well.
So like you're mentioning, and you've mentioned before, so many different initiatives, joint cooperation, MOUs. Is there anything you can share with us and anything that's happening on the diplomatic level, whether here or around the world, between either Israeli and Emirati diplomats or within the business world?
So I think the visa exemption agreement was a huge step, which is the ability to travel without the requirement of a visa. And of course, that entails a lot of cooperation behind the scenes, to make that feasible. I think the creation of the $3 billion investment fund, the Abraham Fund by the US, the UAE, and Israel, to promote private investment, development, economic cooperation, Israel and the West Bank, and other parts of the MENA region is incredibly exciting. And it just again shows the dynamism behind and the momentum behind this. And that fund's already making progress on 2 deals: an energy bridge connecting the Israeli cities of Ashkelon and Eilat, and a program modernizing Palestinian and Jordanian checkpoints. And also we're working with the US and Israel in the energy sector. And of course, that's expected to create a framework on issues that are challenging to everybody, but that will benefit everybody, whether it's renewable energy to water desalination technology. And so these are not lofty political goals, but they're tangible deliverables that we hope will better people's lives. I think that's the type of agreement and the type of projects that we're working on from the outset with both the Israelis and the United States in this trilateral cooperation. And I think those are some of the agreements that we can talk about today. On the diplomatic side, I think that once we've signed all of these agreements, we'll start seeing more consultations on various issues, sharing of views. Eventually that will move to more of a political sharing of perspectives on regional challenges. And I think that's also the good.
Is the UAE involved in any way with negotiations looking to normalize ties with Israel, other Arab and Muslim countries who are looking to normalize ties?
No, and I'm not privy to the countries that the US is in discussions with. Like us, other countries may or may not be deciding on this bilateral step, but I'm not privy to that information. We really took this moment and this opportunity at this time. One, as you pointed out, because annexation was such a looming issue and it was part of these discussions to normalize. But 2, I think because the US was also so invested in using its considerable influence with 2 close friends in the region to try and make this happen. And I think that role should not be understated and should be acknowledged. And then I think 3, it should also be acknowledged that from the bigger picture perspective, the UAE for a long time has been trying to change this intolerant dynamic in the region towards other communities. And so for us, this broadening of a Muslim-Jewish dialogue in the region, the Abrahamic Family House that I hope you'll visit on your next trip to the UAE, which will house a synagogue, a mosque, and a church in the same sacred ground to promote that view that our region was always a rich tapestry of all religions and nationalities living side by side in peace. The UAE itself has upward of 190 nationalities living in there and working and building the country together. But I think this bigger picture issue, especially as you see, what just happened in Austria, which was just abominable, and what is happening around Europe today and the Middle East. It's very important that we take stock of that, and that we take a stand, and that we decide what kind of a world we want our children and grandchildren to live in and to grow up in. And so for us, I really hope that that bigger picture view is also part of the impetus for what is happening in this normalization agreement. And so for many years in the UAE, there's been a Jewish community, as you know, residing there. We've had a chief rabbi who's a mutual friend of both of ours. Another rabbi is going and taking up his position in Dubai. And maybe 15 or 20 years ago, if you said, I'm friends with the chief rabbi, of the UAE, people would have said, the chief rabbi of where? And today, that is the fact that is normal and part of our community, I think excites us, and it's very much part of the narrative of the kind of region we want, the kind of country we want, and it's very, very much in sync with what our population wants as well. So I think that's the bigger picture perspective here: is how does this change the dynamics? How does this deflate and take the fuel out of the engines of these extremist views, these religious ideologies that want to take us back centuries to a different time and a different world.
All right, final question. What do you want to tell Emirati and Israeli youth? And well, we can actually not limit it just to youth, everyone. What would you like to tell Israelis and Emiratis watching right now?
Look, I think that the basis of a strong relationship is curiosity, openness, and acceptance. So I think that that curiosity, that openness, that acceptance of each other is going to be the bedrock of the future relationship. I think the people-to-people exchange, visiting each other, understanding each other's cultures, respecting each other's cultures, learning each other's languages, learning each other's religions, and respecting that. I think those are the exciting first steps that people take in these kinds of new relationships. I myself did my master's in Israeli and Jewish studies a long time ago in SOAS, and it was really an eye-opening academic experience for me. And I'm really, really glad that so many more people will be open and interested in learning about each other, going in depth into each other's cultures and histories, and hopefully using that knowledge to detract from, again, the more extreme views, and everyone has them in their societies, and to find that middle road, that middle voice in societies in our region that want us to put aside the last 100 years and look forward to the next 50, and how we can build the shared vision, the shared future for our children, our grandchildren. I hope that's very much, and I know that is very much the spirit that Emirati and Israeli youth are taking this relationship forward on.
Ambassador Lana Nusseibeh, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insight and your very hopeful message for the future of our region.
Thank you, Michal. Stay safe, stay well, stay indoors. And I look forward to being on your program again.